Welcome to Dill's History Part 3. In Part 1 I put a bit of my family on, and my father and some of my family were, well, they was all mentioned in this part. But in Part 3 here I'm going to talk about my father's recollections later on. He wrote them down before he passed away, and a few of them I've stuck in this film, and I hope you'll enjoy them. I read them as if I were him. But first of all, for those of you who don't know him, James Thomas Skardon, known as Jim by everybody, born in number 6 Brewer Street and run his fish business for number 6 Brewer Street for many years, and was renowned all over the country for the smoking of his bloaters and kippers. We used to box these up when I was a youngster. He used to have 2 boats landing to him. I can't remember their names offhand, but we would get many cranner herring coming every day, which were smoked and kippered, and a lot of them were boxed up in wooden boxes, put on the train and sent all over the country. My dad married Molly Button, who at that time lived in Easttree and worked for the vicar out there. And as you see in the photograph here, in the 1950s, Dad used to make all these carnival floats out of the fish boxes, old fish boxes, and thousands of paper flowers, and many first prize. And that was my sister Linda. He had the Fairway and several other boats. The Fairway was a famous old boat, belonged to, she was the Lady Beatty originally, Harry Meakin's old boat. And that's a picture of my dad there on his fish round, which he did in his younger days, on his bike. I used to sit on the back of that bike when I was a kid and ride around the country and run up to the doors, knock on the doors to the old ladies, go and get orders, threepence worth of coalie for the cat. That's Jim down the Potteries. He owned a lump of land where Hutchins Timber Yard now stands, by the old Potteries, where he kept goats, pigs, chickens, turkeys, rabbits, everything was kept down there. That's me, David Skardon. I'm the one who's talking, and that's my father Jim again. This is the famous North Deal band, which was Granters. It used to go around the streets playing, and money was given to charity. That is now in St George's Road in the museum. Jim's father George, fishmonger as well, he was mentioned in dispatches in the First World War. Lots of fish came through the gates of 6 Brewer Street and was cured during the good old days. This is Dad's father, George, on his fish round back in the 1940s, when fish was part of the regular everyday dish in them days. Tyne Tower's got a bit of history for us. My grandmother, my dad's mother, was born in the Tyne Tower. That's her there, Edith Maud Hayward. Her father was Isaac Gammon Hayward. He was the clockmaker and watchmaker in the Tyne Tower. And there's the famous North Deal band, Robert Skardon's, my grantor. Second from the right is Grantor, and above him, second from the right at the top hand side, is Dickie Lill, a famous old boatman. I will now read you my father's recollections in his own words, as if I were him. My name is James Thomas Skardon. Call me Jim. I was born in 6 Brewer Street on the 27th of December 1926. So I'm going to tell you a few of my recollections which I recall. During the mid-1930s, the Admiralty took over Nelson Hall, which is situated in Nelson Street. It was called the National Naval Cadet Corps, NNCC for short. I was one of the lads who joined it, along with a good many more of North Deal lads. Most of us spent our spare time on the beach and went afloat in the boats with the old boatman at Dill, learning the way of life and hardships of the sea. At Nelson Hall, we were trained the Navy way by ex-old-timers retired from the naval life. First was strict discipline. Then we had to learn the naval way of seamanship, somewhat different to the way we handled things on the beach. Little did we know at the time that the government of the day was training us for what was to come. The situation in Europe was far from good, but we didn't think then that it would end up in war with this country. When it happened, the older lads volunteered to join up within the first few days. Most went to Lowestoft to take over converted trawlers, which had been commandeered into naval service, becoming the Royal Naval Patrol Service. My brother George was one of them, and went to sea with just a rifle. During their first few days out, they were attacked by a German aircraft, which left him and others of the crew wounded, from which they were taken to hospital to recover. Throughout the few years prior to the outbreak of war, Australian and European refugees came to this country in their hundreds. HMS Robertson at Richborough was taken over to accommodate them. Many used to spend their time in Deal during the day, easily distinguishable by their bicycles with big thick tyres. A few weeks into the war, the NNCC was disbanded, and the only photo taken of us that I know had Sam Smith took. But before he had the opportunity to show it to me, he died, and I am certain as to how many of the NNCC lads are still with us today. The summer of 1937, Coronation Year, saw the review of the Home Fleet, which took part in the Downs off Deal. The Royal Yacht Victoria and Albert lay at anchor off Deal Pier in Tugboat Stream. Outside her was the pride of the Royal Navy, HMS Hood, a battle cruiser. Although they were anchored the length of the coast from Kingsdown right round to Broadstairs, ships of all sizes and kinds, and this was but part of the fleet England had in those days. Deal was alive with visitors, bringing plenty of work to the boatmen, who were kept busy with motorboat trips. Shops and businesses in the town flourished from the extra income. Many local lads were on these ships. There wasn't a lot of choice then, as during the Depression work was hard to find. So the services were another answer. In those days there was no state benefits. It was a case of no work, no money. In those far lost days the seafront used to be packed with people. Coloured fairy lights lined the length of the promenade and the full length of the pier, right through the summer months. This, with the addition of the fleet being fully lit up as well, was a spectacular sight, and could never be forgotten by those that saw it. A sight, sadly, that Deal and the Downs will never see again. Freddie Upton was a very smart man when dressed in his best refinery, and on a few of these evenings asked me to dress in my Sunday best. We sailed out in the Rose Marie to take out dignitaries to the Royal Yacht, but were never permitted to board her. Pubs during those days saw an extra income from the Matlows, ashore on Liberty Eve each evening, but never was there any trouble. Before the widening of Queen Street, the Old Swan Hotel projected out on one side of West Street, with the White Horse on the opposite corner. Where the Swan, now called the Hole in the Roof, was Pickford's Ice Factory. This is where I used to go with my father for ice. He would carry 100-weight blocks on his head, with me walking alongside with my wheelbarrow and a 100-weight piece in it. All the fishmongers and butchers of the town and district had to collect their ice from here. Pickford's moved to Thanet, putting on a twice-weekly delivery of ice to Deal. In 1939, things at sea became more disastrous. The SS Maritime went ashore on the Goodwin Sands, almost on the same spot as the first Maritime, which was lost in 1913. 8 tugs tried to pull her off, but eventually she broke her back and became a total loss. She was one of the East Indies ships with a cargo of chests of tea and goatskins. Nearly every boat on Deal Beach was engaged in salvaging her cargo. This was extremely hard work for us, and everything had to be manhandled. A few weeks later, the Belgian ship SS Cabinda went ashore, not far from the south of the Maritime. War had broken out, so no lights were permittable. Again, 8 tugs were used in an effort to refloat her, but she too became a total loss. Her cargo was sacks of coffee, beans and horsehides. Again, Deal boatmen salvaged much of this cargo before the sea flooded their holds. During this period, the Downs became a controlled contraband area, with a variety of ships coming in to anchor day and night. Trawlers that were converted for minesweeping duties were used to sweep for magnetic mines laid in secret by U-boats and mine layers by the enemy. Very little was known about these types of mines, for Germany had been producing them for quite a period before the outbreak of war. Later on, they were redesigned and dropped on a parachute by aircraft. Trawlers towed empty barges behind them in order to trigger off the mines, but once the mine was exploded, the trawler had to return to Harwich to pick up another barge. This practice was carried on until the degaussing gear was used. This was a better method, which employed large cables secured around the internal lines of the ship's side and charged with the current of electricity to neutralise the ship. It could be switched on and off as required when in mined areas. The Germans got to know this method and added a time mechanism on them. The sweepers would run ahead of the cargo ships with the degausser on and not blow a mine. Then up would go a ship as the mine's mechanism was activated. During my days minesweeping, if we knew that a mine had been laid in the area, it would take us 12 runs over it before it was exploded. By this time, we had what was called LL sweeps. This is pulsating very high power electricity through two thick cables down onto the seabed, thus blowing up the mines. The first magnetic mine was detonated in the Bristol Channel during the first part of the war. Aircraft were fitted with large rings beneath them and used to explode mines. This didn't last long as it wasn't very successful. On November the 23rd, 1939, shortly after midnight, the Admiralty was informed that at 10 p.m, sentries at Shoegreen had seen a German aircraft dropped an object into the sea near the beach. I won't go into details. When this was discovered to be a mine, orders were given to recover and examine it at all costs. Later that day, another one was found. They were 7 feet long and made of some sort of aluminium alloy. By 4 p.m, the mine was made innocuous, then hoisted up on a lorry and taken to HMS Vernon the next day. The men involved were officers and ratings of HMS Vernon, along with soldiers which were stationed at Shoegreen. The secrets of Germany's magnetic mine had been discovered. With new information, it was now possible to provide countermeasures, which in turn saved countless other ships from destruction. The first ship to be mined was off the east coast on September the 10th, 1939. This was the British ship SS Magnifer, which sank after contact. 6 days later, the city of Paris struck a mine, but escaped with damage. Each day from then on, there were more ships falling foul of these mines and sinking. And so back to the Downs.
When HM trawler Aragonite
was hit by a mine, another of Her Majesty's trawlers went alongside of her, taking her in tow. But with her best efforts to try and beach her, she failed. She sunk off Harold Road. I'm forgetful of whether her crew were all saved or not, but it was in the afternoon. A green wreck buoy marked her position up until the 1960s. Ships that were steaming through the Downs and at anchor were then being struck by mines. Mines of a different sort though. These were British contact mines that had broken away from their moorings in the minefields. Sea mines were not a new weapon, having been around for more than 2 centuries in many different forms. During the First and Second World Wars, mines were used for protecting our shipping lanes and ports from enemy naval ships. The mine had a sinker attached to it and was dropped to the seabed by a mine layer. After a short time, the mine would automatically rise to the surface, its mooring wire reeling out to keep it attached to the sinker. The delay in release gave the mine layer enough time to clear the area, thus avoiding a strike by its own mines. These mines hung under the surface at a pre-regulated depth, controlled by a device called the hydrostat, which gripped the mooring wire once it reached its floating depth, also activating it at the same time. The mine contained 350 pounds of TNT gluten cotton trichotoluethene, which took up about half of its internal area, the rest being an air chamber. The outer surface of the mine held 5 or more brass horns, each containing a glass tube, which on contact with the ship would break and cause detonation. The Dutch Coaster Nora was one victim of this type of mine. I used to be on the beach every morning when on one morning in particular, half a dozen mines had been washed ashore, which I reported to the Coast Guard. I also salvaged hatchways along with lots of other useful articles. It was around 7 a.m. I was looking out to sea when suddenly I saw a flash about Tugboat Stream out, directly off Farrier Street. It was very cold with snow showers obscuring the visibility intermittently. Freddie Upton at that time lived at number 3
Coppin Street, now number 9, with his mother. His boats, the Rosemarie and the Terrier, which was later renamed Star of the Sea, were berthed opposite the Star and Garter. I rushed down to Freddie's house and banged on the door. His mother opened it and said no more, only, "What was that explosion?" I said that a ship had struck the mine, and I saw the flash just outside the tugboat stream, and I think she ought to give Freddie a call. Freddie came down the stairs and asked what the problem was. This I explained to him. "Anyone about up there, young'un?" he asked me. "No," I replied. So his mother made us a cup of tea, which we drank whilst discussing the situation. The weather wasn't very good, and a southeast gale was blowing and heavy snow showers. "Do you reckon we can get afloat, young'un?" he said to me. "Well, we can have a go," I replied. The engine in the Rosemarie was frozen up, so we made the Terrier ready. Whilst trying to start her engine, the starting handle came off and hit Freddie in the shin, so there was nothing we could do. Later that morning, we did manage to thaw out the Rosemarie's engine, and with more help available, managed to get her afloat. The vessel was the Nora, and standing off from her was a HM trawler. I can't remember her name. Aboard the trawler was the officer in charge of the Downs. He was waiting for orders from Dover before he could take the Nora in tow. Freddie asked if we could take over and beach her off the 6 Green, running the kedge anchor away from her. Here she would be quite safe. The officer in charge had orders meanwhile to tow her to the south side of the pier, out of harm's way. "If you do that," said Freddie, "she'll drive down onto the pier with this southeast wind." Freddie's advice was ignored, and the Nora was towed south of the pier, later to drag her anchor and become a total loss, taking the pier with her. During the early 1960s, my son David located the Nora's anchor and chain, which we salvaged. The receiver Rex tried to claim this, but I refused until the salvage price was agreed. This was set at £90, the anchor being collected by Everard Shipping Company of Rochester on a low loader. Some weeks later the payment was received. This was the sum of £20, which after much argument had to be taken. Where the rest went I never knew. The Flanders, a Belgian freighter loaded with general cargo, was lying at anchor at Fork Spit when another ship was in collision with her just before 7 a.m. She was taken in water slowly, but again the officer for the Downs had to wait for orders from Dover before he could take action. These orders never came, and we watched her from the distance between snowstorms slowly getting heavier in the water. By 11 a.m. it was all over. She had sunk, taking her valuable cargo with her. This ship could have been saved but for the bureaucracy of red tape. Freddie had a hut on the foreshore, from which we always used to keep a lookout. It was in the forenoon, and staring out to sea, watching the shipping, we heard a vessel blowing her siren continuously. Realising that she was in trouble when we saw her haul round the pier head, steaming hard out for the shore, when she suddenly capsized. She was the Dinard, a French coaster, laden with pitch. Freddie always kept the Rosemarie ready to launch, with her bows facing the sea. Local boatman manned her, and I was given orders to let go the slip. She ran down the beach and hit a huge swell rolling in, throwing her on her beam end. Her crew, Dongo Middleton, Tom Lilly, known as Sparks, and George Baker, known as Frenchie, were all thrown into the sea. Frenchie was calling out, "Save my hat!" I saved his hat and gave it to him, but I asked why he shouted out to save it. His reply was, "Well, I only bought it yesterday and didn't want to lose it." He'd never had a thought for his own life. An Italian tanker, of which her name I cannot remember, had been in collision with another ship. She was empty of oil, which was one good thing. We launched to her in the Rosemarie, but this time Freddie took command before the naval officer of the Downs came on the scene. She was beached off Farrier Street. The divers working on her employed us for a couple of days, and she was patched up under the waterline with quick-drying cement and then kedged off into deeper water. She was later taken to the shipyard and repaired. This was one ship that was saved, although it could have been against us when Italy entered the war. Another incident. I left my house in Brewer Street after having dinner and walked a few yards to the beach. Here I saw a coaster bouncing about along shore. It was high tide at the time, and I asked the crew if they required any assistance, but they were adamant and refused. Just then Roddy Walmsley, a mate of mine, came along. We stood together watching her bumping to and fro in the fresh easterly wind, slowly being driven northwards. The Coast Guard by this time had arrived with their rocket apparatus, with Benny Bailey arriving on the scene as well. We all helped to set up the apparatus on the beach, but every time we were ready to fire, the vessel had drifted too far away to land out of reach. 3 rockets were eventually fired, but each one missed. We were almost at Pedwell Bay by the time we managed to get a line aboard her. Benny Bailey ran out to her as she momentarily grounded, and by now the tide had ebbed somewhat. Ramsgate lifeboat arrived on the scene and ordered Benny off, putting on board their own men and a line. She was pulled clear and towed to Ramsgate. We helped to pack the Coast Guard's gear up and were carrying it back when thankfully a lorry pulled up alongside us and took us and the gear back to Deal via the sandhills. One day we watched a contact mine drift through the ruins of the pier head and out the other side without exploding. This one came ashore on Walmer Beach. These few months of the war kept us very busy in the Downs with shipping. A keen eye was kept out constantly for vessels requiring pilots, and pilots wanted to be brought ashore. Many boats were employed in this service, some of the pilots taking rooms at our own houses, until another ship required their assistance on passage to Dungeness or up channel to Gravesend. Signals used to be hoisted up ship's mast in the form of flags, stating what they required, and a doctor was being requested frequently. Dr. Hall was the one always called for sea duties, going afloat with Freddie in the Rosemarie, until later on the lifeboat took over the duty. Ships used to lie in the Downs for many weeks and frequently ran short of provisions. This again was a good source of income for the boatmen, keeping them busy running out supplies. We used to take a barrow to the butchers, grocers and greengrocers to collect the provisions for the ships. Newspapers were always very popular. Provisions were sorted out to order and then taken out to the ships requiring them. A water tender also came to the Downs daily, replenishing any ship that had run short of water. This vessel was stationed at Dover. Looking back, I think one of the biggest blunders to take place in the Channel was the dash of the German battleship Scharnhorst and her escort on February 12, 1942. The French resistance had already sent a message that the ships were about to leave Brest within a day or so. No one believed them. The code name of Miller was put forward for this, and to cut a story short, other than looking for a Mr. Miller, with the code being locked away, no one knew anything about it. The 6 Swordfish aircraft that went out to attack her with torpedoes from Manston didn't stand a chance. The gunfire could be heard up the North Falls. The cross-channel guns opened fire later in the afternoon. It was around 2 p.m. when the Swordfish attacked her. It was too late, however, to help the Swordfish, as the ships were well out of range of our shore-based guns. A few days after this, the Germans executed some of the dock workers suspected of being part of the resistance. I can tell you now that not all the guns were at the tunnels. It would have been the wrong thing to have kept them all confined together. I was home on leave from the Navy and went with my father to the country delivering fish, and remember him supplying fish to the soldiers. We went to Danbridge, Wingham, where there was an 18-inch gun hidden in the trees. They told me, as I was in uniform, that the gun was only taken to the tunnel cut-in at night time by the way of the East Kent Light Railway, known as Padding. There was also another one at Shepherdwell. The Earl of Guildford's mansion at Waldershire was taken over and used as a hospital for wounded personnel. The late Mrs. Kingdom, Sylvia White and my wife Molly Skardon were all Red Cross nurses there. They all came from Eastring. Many nurses served there from all over the area and did a great job towards the war effort, giving all their time to nurse injured men back to good health. Whether or not they received any recognition for their services, I don't know, but they all deserved a medal. On one last item on mines, the acoustic mine. We had to sweep this using a thing we called the bucket. It was dropped over the bow of a minesweeper and ran underneath 2 amidships. The hammers were switched on and it made a hell of a noise throughout the ship. These mines, like the magnetic mines, were dropped by aircraft and e-boats in the approaches to ports and river estuaries. So in all we swept for 3 kinds of mines. The contact mine, which was moored to the seabed, was swept with Arapisa cutting gear, the magnetic mine by LL electric power, and the acoustic mine by electric vibration hammer. Minesweepers, which were called BYMS, British Yacht Minesweepers, were on lease and lend arrangement from America. These were the types I served on. In the early days, boats caught smuggling goods were sawn in half by the customs men and then used as garden sheds. Before my landing Sandown Road was built on, one existed there for many, many years. The 1950s saw the rebuild of the Deal Pier. When this was finished, we had ships coming into the pier that used to take passengers to and fro up and down the channel. The Queen of the Channel, she used to sail to Boulogne, giving you day trips out to Boulogne. We had the Royal Daffodil, she used to sail up and down to the coast, docking into different ports, down the south coast and up as far as London. And the Royal Sovereign. I think the Royal Sovereign, we never used to see her very much, but I think she was more or less a stand-in for the other two ships if something had gone wrong. They were good days, good trips, and days again we'll never see again, I don't expect. So that's the end of my memoirs, and I hope you've all enjoyed these. Deal is not like it used to be, and time has now took its toll of me as well, so thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Jim Skardon.